Hello and welcome to Malachi's Message, Toxic Mold Sucks expert episodes, co-hosted by the co-founders of Malachi's Message, Elizabeth Kripe and Emily Rochelle. Here they will use the platform to interview those who are experts in the industry, hoping to give you the tools and resources that you need to be successful in your healing process. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kripe. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Malachi's Message. Co-hosting today is Emily Rochelle. She is the co-founder and board chair of Malachi's Message, and you are currently watching Toxic Mold Sucks. And today we're doing an expert interview with Michael Rubino. He is the president of All American Restoration. He's a certified professional with expertise in mold removal. And he is also the author of a book titled The Mold Medic. We are so excited just to hear what you have to say today about remediation and about hurricanes. Michael, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for seriously doing this interview. Can you first start out by just telling us how you got started in remediation?
Yeah. When I was, about 3 years old, I was dreaming of becoming this mold professional. It was glorious. And the real story is, I'm actually a second generation contractor. My dad was a contractor since I'm 5 years old. Before that, he was a master electrician. So I learned a vast amount of knowledge with homes, buildings, construction, et cetera, from him. And one of the big things that his company did was fire restoration. If you know anything about fires, they get put out with water. And then if you know anything about mold, water creates mold. So you have this opportunity for pretty disastrous situations in people's homes when they have a fire. And just kind of being in that industry, in hindsight, knowing what I know now, was like, it's pretty scary because they had all these homes that were restored from the fire perspective. But at the time, as a kid, mold really wasn't this big thing where people didn't really think mold was a big deal. You had insurance companies that weren't covering a lot of the mold damage. Clients weren't concerned that was going to be a problem for them, so they didn't really want to deal with it. So a lot of this stuff, in the insurance world, it just kind of got swept under the rug. After Hurricane Sandy, when you have this big national event, that's when I really started to see people get sick. It was such a big problem in a concentrated area all over the tri-state area around New York, where I'm from. And, watching all of that transpire, having these houses be remediated, and then, getting the call maybe a year after. Actually, I got the call literally up until about 7 years after Hurricane Sandy is when I stopped getting calls about Hurricane Sandy damage. So it's a long time for people to still be dealing with remediation efforts after that big storm. And a lot of what I noticed was that, I was looking at it from a science perspective, right? You would see these companies and they would come in and remove drywall, remove insulation, and it was very construction-like. It's kind of the best way to say it. They weren't really employing science to remove mold. And I think what they were doing in their mind was, as long as you ripped out the drywall, as long as you removed the insulation, you were okay. And what I think had happened is a lot of these companies, they were just doing that, maybe spraying some sort of bleach at the time. That's what a lot of people used, and then just building right back over it. And so that's why we started getting these calls, I believe, because a lot of the work that I had done afterwards was literally opening up the same exact areas that were impacted by water damage. And what I saw behind it was just alarming. I mean, it was like literally mold blooms going on behind that wall that was supposedly remediated. So it was no wonder that people were sick. And it actually took that hurricane for me to really understand that mold can impact people's health. And then I went down this area, and I really started diving into the home health aspect, how the living environment can impact somebody's health. And it's mold, but also water damage can accompany bacteria. So it's bacteria as well. Then you have the toxins that both mold and bacteria can create, right? So you have all these different components that people use. And then, for many years, mold remediation companies, they use toxic compounds to remove mold. So kind of adding more fuel to the fire in terms of how it impacts people's health. So when I started looking at all of this, it was like, I don't know, you get so alarmed or so shocked at what's happening. And as you're putting the pieces of the puzzle together, you just can't stop. You get obsessed with it, because once you know something and it's being done wrong 99% of the time, you're like, oh my God, this is a problem, And so that led to, my almost decade-long journey fixing homes. But then I quickly realized that in order for me to truly solve anything, I needed to get the information of what I was actually finding in the course of what I was doing and put it into a book so that others can read it. Because I can't fix every house in the world. It's impossible. There's others that need to do it too. And there's some good people doing really good work that have kind of stumbled upon similar building blocks that I have. But it's, that's kind of the journey that I've been across, and why I'm so passionate about helping people, because I feel like I have to.
So what were some of the specific things you said you started with Sandy? What were some of the specific things? You mentioned one of them, but what were some that you saw remediators doing after Sandy that you said took up to 7 years for people to actually figure out and get corrected? What were some of the things you were seeing?
So two main things. One, people weren't fully removing the mold. They were partially removing it and then just building right back over it. And if you partially remove mold, it'd be kind of like, just to give like a layman's terms of an analogy here. So, weeds, right? If you just cut the weed off at the stem, the weed's going to grow back. It's exactly what they were doing. They were just cutting mold off at the stem. They were leaving the roots behind. The mold was growing right back, right? And so that was the biggest problem that I saw. The second biggest problem that I saw, which is still a very vast problem today, is if you know about mold, the science behind it really is very simple. Mold reproduces by methods of spores. It produces these spores, kind of like how weeds produce seeds, right? It gets aerosolized. It finds damp, moist areas inside the home, and guess what? It starts to grow into more mold. Let's look at this as like a factory. You have these mold factories producing contamination. The contamination finds water, produces more factories. And this is how people get sick, because it starts off as one problem, it turns into 10 problems very quickly. And the entire industry, even today, totally neglects this. As a matter of fact, I heard it was a closed discussion via the EPA. It's on YouTube. If you have the link, you can access it, but it's unlisted. So meaning you can't just search in YouTube EPA March hearing. But it was a doctor from Yale, and I think maybe Stanford University was the other doctor. And they talked about how once you have mold, these spores, they go everywhere. Like they just travel and circulate throughout the house. And so when this happens, that has to be cleaned up. And they said in there, we're unsure if it's necessary to go to that length, or if you just remove the sources, the person will get better. Well, I can tell you based on experience, working with over 1,000 people, that you have to go that distance. Because if you don't go that distance, guess what? Even after remediation, you'll walk into your house and still feel the effects of it. That's what people consider failed remediation. But really the simplicity of it is a lot of these remediators, they don't know that. They don't realize that you have to clean up the byproducts that mold creates the entire time that it's living inside your environment, or those contaminants still circulate throughout your air. They still get into your breathing zone, enter the body, and worse, they still opportunistically find water intrusion events inside your home and start to grow more mold. So that's the 30,000 foot view of why most companies don't do it right. And it's not really in any standards. Like the ISCR CS520 doesn't say if you have mold in your bathroom, remove that, but also clean your entire house. It doesn't say that, but it should.
You made a lot of really good points there. I think you just answered the next question too.
Sorry.
About what some of the errors are that remediators make.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not addressing the rest of the house is one of the big problems that they make.
I can make another one though. It happens all the time. If you don't understand building pressurization, which a lot of people don't, it's just crazy to me, because like the whole point of remediation is understanding building pressurization and changing things as needed to control the situation. But I've heard stories where, for instance, a client called me in Georgia once and was like, hey, look, I have this situation. I have a remediation here. I think I should throw them off the job. And I'm like, well, what's going on? They're like, well, the problem is in the living room downstairs, but I smell it all the way from upstairs. I'm like, huh. They're like, she's like, yeah. And it just, something isn't right. I'm starting to feel something. I need to know what to do. I'm like, well, do me a favor. Can you go downstairs? They should have plastic up, right? Can you go downstairs? Can you just tell me what's going on? They're like, well, they have this air scrubber machine inside the contained area and then one outside the contained area. I'm like, okay. And they're done remediating the area inside the containment? Yes. Okay. Do me a favor. Open that zipper and see what the air scrubber is set to. She goes, okay. It's set to full blast. No, it's set to, sorry, it was set to halfway. Okay. What's the one outside set to? She's like, it's set to full blast. I'm like, okay. So basically what's happening is the area outside the containment is pulling more pressure towards it than the area inside the containment. And guess what? There's a ceiling. The ceiling was cut open. So it's pulling all the mold from the ceiling into the rest of the house, just because these guys didn't understand that they should have had the one inside the containment higher than the one outside the containment. So it was reversing the pressure. And they were trying to not cross-contaminate, and what they were actually doing was totally cross-contaminating. So I asked her to turn that one all the way down, and adjust it so that the pressurization was proper, because I didn't want her to continue to do that. And she's like, okay, I need to throw them off the job. I said, hey, that's your call. I'm a little concerned because they don't understand the basics here. So these are some of the horror stories you can have. I mean, again, there's a lot of mold remediation is theory. So when you go and take a class to become a mold remediator, it's the same as an inspector. You're taking if you're in Texas, a 5-day class. Most of the country is a 3-day class. And, in 3 days, you're learning the theory, but you don't really get to apply it. You don't see how to apply it. It's just theory. So in that theory, they're like, as long as you have a machine set up and it's vented out the window, that creates negative pressure. Okay, got it. But what if there is no window? Well, then you got to create pressurization outside, positive pressure, so that, you're not outside the area and have it neutral in there, and you're not understanding that. They don't explain how to do that. So you come out of there, if you don't know pressurization well, you come out of there not knowing what you're doing, and then going out in the world and start charging people thousands of dollars to not know what you're doing. Mm. And this is how the remediation world is created. 50,000 companies, by the way.
So what are some things that people, since it is a tricky industry that way, what are some things people can ask potential remediators that they're looking at? What are some things they can ask them to know if they're actually qualified, if they're in it for the right reasons, so that they have a little bit of their own power going into it, and maybe more people won't be taken for a ride?
Yeah, you know what? I just came up with this, and I love this idea. I'm hoping you guys love it too. Start telling the remediators you're extremely sensitive. I am the most sensitive to mold on the planet. I think just by saying that, just to them up front, you don't even have to be sensitive. But if you say that, you're going to scare the people that have no idea what they're doing away. Because all they're going to think is like, oh my God, this person's a difficult client. They're a liability. I don't know if I trust my guys to deal with this, right? You're going to start scaring people away. For me, like all we try to deal with, because, there's only so many people we can help in a particular time frame. All we try to deal with is look for the most sensitive people to work with, because those are the people that need help the most. And there's far and few between people that actually understand this stuff from a science-based perspective to help those people. So I think, say you're sensitive, extremely sensitive, and you just want to make, I want to know what you're going to do to make sure that this is done right because I'm extremely sensitive. I think you're going to see people weed themselves out, honestly, right off of that. But, I would be concerned with how long it takes. There's a big craze with dry fogging. I don't know if you guys have heard that term, but essentially the whole concept is you don't need to do any demolition. We have this fog that, it's going to cover every crack and crevice, going to go behind walls, going to kill everything. Well, I can assure you, if you even look up the white paper of this dry fogging solution, I don't care what it is, could be any of them. There's a few of them. It's going to show you right on the white paper that, originally it kills us on the surface, the levels go down. But go look, it'll tell you they tested it, 1 month in, 3 months in, 6 months in. You're going to see like this U of it, like it goes down and then it starts coming right back up and then it's worse than it was. So their solution to that is we'll just fog every 6 months. Hey, look, it's up to you if you want to put a Band-Aid on something and deal with it every 6 months. But I can tell you that they're not testing for mycotoxins. We have no idea if this fog creates, threatens mold to the point where it starts to accelerate production of mycotoxins. There's a lot of concerns regarding this technology and the product. I don't use it. I believe in removing the root cause of the problem, because guess what? The fog doesn't do. It doesn't correct the situation that allowed mold to grow in the first place, right? So if your window's leaking, you fogged it, you killed what's on the surface. Fantastic. Your window's still leaking, so you're still going to have more mold growing. And at that point, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, and people are paying thousands of dollars for this, and I'm getting the call, months later, and I'm not feeling well again. And it's painful to get those calls because that people spent their hard-earned money on something that didn't work. And then when you talk to the people that provide that service, they'll tell you, that person's just sensitive. That it didn't work because they're just too sensitive. It's not that they're too sensitive. It's just the product doesn't work. And it's just that simple.
So I want to follow up with that. What could they ask in regards to removing like walls or products with a remediator? I know some people are saying, if it's in your walls, just remove just that portion. Some people are saying remove a foot past it. And I know that's a question actually in the last 2 weeks I've heard from a lot of people asking, should my remediator move the entire wall? Should they take out a foot above where the water damage was? And it's such a controversial topic. I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
Ooh, I love controversial topics. Okay. So if it's on an exterior wall, it should be removed floor to ceiling. You want to know why? Because 2 feet is not going to be enough because you have insulation on an exterior wall. And so if you know about insulation, it acts like a sponge when it comes to water damage, mold growth, etc. So you're going to have all of this mold that's inside the wall cavity. And the only way to remove it and be able to replace it properly after would be to open the entire wall up, pull out all the insulation, vacuum out the entire cavity. We're talking about being thorough, If you don't do that, likely you're still going to have a source there that can produce and get it into the air. And people think like, well, if it's behind my wall, that's no problem. Well, unfortunately, behind your wall is not hermetically sealed. You're going to have mold coming into your environment. It's going to be recirculated. It's going to get into your breathing zone. You want to remove it, right? And while you're cutting 2 foot, you have a perfect opportunity. The containment's all there. Everything's set up properly. You have the perfect opportunity to remove it. And guess what? Drywall is the cheapest part of the equation. So remove it from floor to ceiling, pull it all out, do it right. Furthermore, leaks typically come from above. So if the whole wall got wet from top down, why would you only remove 2 feet on the bottom? I'm not going to mention these big national chain names or anything like that, but this is what's been done for the last 20, 30 years. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. I never really thought that ever made sense. If the water comes from top down, you got to remove from top down. And I think that's really important to make sure everything dries out properly, especially insulation. Insulation gets wet. It's going to stay wet longer than 24 hours, especially inside of a wall cavity. It's like if you leave a wet sponge on the counter, what's going to happen? You're still going to have moisture in between the sponge and the counter, but everything else around it's dry. It's the same thing. That's what you have inside your wall. So you don't want that. You want to remove it properly. And I think that's something you may want to ask the remediator too. Like, hey, this whole wall got wet. What's your plan here? Yeah. If they're like, don't worry about it. I'm going to cut like 6 inches off the bottom. You're good to go. Now, that guy's not for you. He's not thorough enough. And, I think we all could use, more thoroughness in our lives, and especially when it comes to something that can impact our health.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to go backwards one question. Yeah. To confirm what Michael said about the fogging, because that's one of the biggest, I'd say it's scams that we see in our state, is companies go in and say that their miracle fogging agent is going to go magically through the walls and kill all the mold inside the wall cavities and they're going to be good. And then lay a protective barrier for 6 to 12 months. When it doesn't, we actually, long story short, but they're paying $5,000 for this service and the mold's still there.
That's cheap for what I've seen.
Yeah.
That's one of the ones that was going around this city about a year ago, doing that and taking people's money. But no, that's one of the biggest things we see too. So going back to what Michael said, confirming that's not.
Look, I will be upfront and honest with you. If it worked, I'd be doing it. And the reason why is because you make way more money, okay, walking around with a little device for $5,000, okay, setting it up in a room, than you will rolling up your sleeves and getting it done. Because guess what? When you open up a wall, you don't know what you're going to find. And you have to fix it no matter what. That's what you're there to do. And so the profitability goes down significantly when you actually have to do things sight unseen and fix people's problems. And you're in it both feet with them, you know? And I think that should speak volume there. If this stuff worked, you know, I know for a fact I would be doing it because the profit margins are through the roof. Yeah. It just doesn't work. And so I won't get involved in anything that doesn't work, because if I'm not helping people, what am I doing this for? Yeah. And that's the bottom line. And unfortunately with the fogging solutions, you know, I know that they're all the craze, you know, and I've seen the white papers myself, you know, they don't work because you're not solving the root cause of the problem. And that's the simplicity of it, you know. Yeah. If your roof is leaking, you can fog all you want, but your roof is still leaking. The mold is going to come back the day that they leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited for those that are watching. Michael is actually about to start servicing the state of Texas. So very excited to have somebody as knowledgeable as thorough as Michael in Texas.
I take my class tomorrow, and my test tomorrow. So hopefully guys, you know, watch out, because if I pass it, I may just start teaching the Texas class, you know.
That would be amazing. One of our other questions that we have is, do you think testing is necessary before mold remediation or even after?
Yeah, I mean, both, yes to both. And here's why. So a couple of different reasons. Let's just talk about economics, right? Mold remediation is expensive to do it the right way. Let's just call, you know, the kettle black here. You want to have the data to understand and prioritize what the areas actually are, what they consist of, because obviously there's different species that are going to be present in different amounts. And why is that important? Well, because let's just say, for argument's sake, it costs $5,000 to remediate a bathroom, okay? And you have two of them. One bathroom has 5,000 spores of, I don't know, aspergillus. One has 500 spores of aspergillus. And you have to prioritize only doing one, because let's just say, for this argument's sake, that your insurance company won't cover this for whatever reason, okay? You're going to pick the bathroom that has 5,000 spores, because you know that by removing the contamination in that bathroom, by getting rid of the source there, you're going to yield the better buck spent there, if you will. So I think having those numbers really puts things into perspective in economics. And I can think of thousands of different scenarios where that exact scenario happened, where there was, you know, 5 or 10 different source areas. The person can only afford to remove not all of them, a few of them. And we had to actually look and say, well, if I'm spending any money to improve my environment, I'm focusing on these areas. You know, they had areas that were, you know, just slightly elevated from outside air. So to give you that perspective, you know, yes, you can still remediate that and figure out what's going on and, you know, course correct things. But if you have a limited amount of funds, you want to be able to have that data to kind of prioritize. And I think that's important. The second thing is it develops a baseline, right? So you need to know how bad it is at the start of it, so that as you're remediating, you have some sort of an end goal in sight of how much do I need to correct this before it's considered corrected. And I think having a baseline is very important, because you need to see where it started at and where it's finished at, so you can determine if finished is good enough, right? And I think testing is so important. Now, why test on the back end? Well, that's easy, because mold is microscopic in its basic nature. And so, I don't know, I'm a pretty nice guy, but I don't have microscopic vision. So no matter how good of a job that I do, unfortunately, I have to check my own work via the lab to make sure that I got everything, because the thoroughness is just not perfect. The only way to get perfect results is to really test it and make sure that it's perfect before you say, I am done. And I think that you can't do it any other way. And I like to think that people are good by nature. So I don't think that it's, testing needs to be done in this malicious way. It just needs to really have this accountability so that everybody agrees, the consultant, the remediator, the client, hey, this has been done properly. I'm satisfied with this result.
Is it fairly normal? I know a lot of people kind of have this idealistic perspective that once a remediator comes in, they're going to do their job and the post-testing is going to come back clean and perfect with no spore counts whatsoever. Is that an actual reality, or should people change their standards with that?
I wish it was an actual reality, but man, it's just not. And, it's so important to talk about expectations up front and what those expectations are. And it's so important to listen to the professionals and follow the protocol, because there may be stuff that you need to do afterwards, right? And for example, let's say you only have enough money to remediate the bathroom, right? You don't have enough money to remediate the bathroom and clean the whole house. Okay. Well, that doesn't mean the whole house still does not need to be cleaned. It just means that it still has to get done, whether it's done by yourself, whether you have a cleaning company you work with that is, more affordable, because again, in terms of just the cost basis, it's going to be cheaper to hire someone like that than to hire a remediator because of, all the overhead involved. Right. So look, I give people the options as long as you understand that these things still have to be done. If budget's a concern, let's lay things out properly, but you got to follow through on it. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good the remediator is. If there's pieces of the puzzle that haven't been put into place, you're not going to get the end result that you're looking for. In terms of what's remediation wise, like what it should be, I mean, we always strive for zero counts in the air, zero counts on the surface. Sometimes we get there, but honestly, it's a whole lot of luck to get there, and I think that that needs to be said, because the reality of it is you have external factors. No building's hermetically sealed. If I'm remediating an exterior wall, let's say around a window, and that window is not airtight, and they really never really are, because we deal with a lot of components that are breathable components here. You're going to have some air infiltration. So and guess what? Mold's part of our ecosystem. It's going to get into the environment, but you should have a lot less. And typically what our post remediations look like, if they're not all zeros, you're going to have one or two spores here or there, that are just normal outside influence. But I think that, you have to look at it. It certainly needs to be better than what's going on outside in order to pass, because that's what we're here to accomplish. The EPA says that the indoor air quality in America is roughly 50 times worse than outside. And I think that when you look at that, you have to really take that into account and say, okay, well, then we better do a damn good job getting it way better than outside. We should use that as a mile marker. And if we do that and we consider that the end result of passing, you're going to get it there, and it just takes being a little more thorough, going above and beyond, and making sure you really get it all.
Hey, Emily, you're still muted.
I was talking to myself. I was asking, since you deal with a lot of sensitive clients, would you say that's kind of like your main clientele, sensitive clients that have health issues?
Yeah, I would say that's the main clientele that I typically like to work with, because I feel that those people need the most help. And like I said, I have a very limited quantity of people that I'm able to help, every month or year, however you want to look at it. And so I prioritize helping people that need help the most, because I know that there's not a whole lot of people out there like me that specialize in that.
Mm-hmm. And your statement a little while back ago about when you're trying to find the best remediation contractor? That's a genius question to ask, is, you know, or tell them, is that you're very sensitive, because the bad ones will just run.
Oh yeah.
The good
Yeah,
ones like you, who know what they're doing, will want that client because you know you can fix their environment. When you are done with a project and those people move back in, do they typically kind of, do you see them get better right away, or is it still kind of a journey?
You know, it depends. I mean, you know, better right away is really hard to say, because I think that there's levels to this, if you will. Like, for instance, I had a client that in Florida, who within a week after moving out of her environment, she was able to remove the feeding tube. So I should probably start with the story of, she was so sick from her environment, she was eating out of a feeding tube. Within a week of removing herself from that environment, in preparation of us starting to remediate, she was able to remove the feeding tube and eat food again. I mean, she was just such a crazy health decline with that exposure. You know, it's like, you can't. So once it's a miracle, right? Once she moves out, she's able to remove the feeding tube and start to heal. And it's a journey, right? Like, she's definitely plateaued. She's not 100%. The remediation's done. She's still working with her construction team to reconstruct the property in a way that, you know, the problems that existed don't happen again. So we kind of advise on all of that stuff and make sure that everything is done correctly this time. And, you know, now she's in this situation where she's going to her doctor. She's working with her doctor on a program that's going to continue to heal. And, you know, I would say most people, the average is about six months to a year before they really start to feel, I don't even want to say 100%, but, you know, close to 100%, where they feel themselves again. So it is definitely a journey, you know, and I understand that. Like, our job, I know for our company mission is really to create environments where people can heal. And that's the name of the game. It's not, I can't promise anybody that removing mold is going to all of a sudden, you know, be that miracle flipping on that light bulb and you're all of a sudden healed. It's a journey. It's providing you that environment to heal in, so that you're not constantly going backwards by the exposures themselves. And I think that's really what the ultimate goal is. So it can be tough because you have, you know, the expense of remediation, reconstructing it in a way where a lot of the building busts have been resolved. And then you have still the supplements and the medical costs of, you know, kind of getting to that position that you're going for. It's daunting. It's not easy. And, you know, I'm sure you guys know that. And, you know, it can be really tough, but, you know, that's why it's so important to get the right information out there, because it costs too much to spin your wheels and spend money on things that aren't going to help you. And that's why it's like really, really important that people get it right.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Man.
That was great information. Sorry, Elizabeth.
No, I'm sorry. We're both just very excited. It's okay. So where can people get your book? Where can they order your book if they want more information?
Yeah, so our book's available on Target, Walmart, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads. I think pretty much anywhere you would ever find a book, it's there. I highly recommend starting there. I think it's a wealth of information. I do a pretty decent job kind of with the storytelling aspect. The first chapter is called Honda versus Mercedes. You're going to be like, what? How does that have anything to do with mold? And you have to read to find out, because I don't want to blow the story. It's a great one. But it just goes to show you that this is the book is really it's written in simple terminology. You don't have to be a microbiologist to understand it. I wrote it so that, you know, the everyday moms and dads out there that are struggling through these issues can understand and put them on a better path. And I have chapters dedicated to how to find a good inspector, how to find a good remediator, you know, how to find a good contractor after the fact. And it's so vital. And I tell you stories of why it's so important, because it's important to understand what sort of bad things can happen if you don't have the right team. And it is about building a team. And once you build that team and you go through the process and you do it right the first time, it's great because you only have to do it once. And unfortunately, for a lot of my clients that I seek on a daily basis, they have done it more than once. I had a client yesterday that I talked to, been through 2 other remediations that did not work. So like, we really want to do our due diligence to make sure that we're getting this right. I said, I understand. It's perfect. This is exactly what I'm here for, to make sure that you get this right. And if you don't hire us, that's okay. But at least you're more informed now to make a better decision. And that's all that matters, because at the end of the day, there's so much bad stuff out there that's not helpful, that sells people a dream that doesn't actually come through. And, that's why I wrote that book, because I knew that I wasn't going to solve every single house, one house at a time. I needed to get the information out there. And if the consumers are more informed on what they're looking for, and they ask all the right questions of the remediation companies, guess what happens? The remediation companies either need to figure it out, they either need to evolve, or they die. And unfortunately, some of them need to fall off because they're just not doing the right thing. They're not helping people. It's not helpful. But for those that care like me, that it's going to strive them to be better every single day. And that's what we need out there. So hopefully that's what continues to happen throughout that industry, so that there's more success out there than failure. And that's what I would love to see happen.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to us. Please check out his book, pick up a copy of it to get more detail in what we talked about today.